Welcome back to the latest installment of True Crime and Tapping, where I discuss true crime cases and do some triggers for you throughout my recounting of a chosen story. Today, I decided to go with a story that mirrors one of the first cases that I became interested in when I was much younger. And before we get into that case, I do want to say thank you so much for all of the requests that you have sent to me in comments or messages. I will be doing this series twice a month now, so 2 videos will happen every month due to the influx of requests that I've gotten, which is incredible, and I thank you for enjoying these stories or just using them to relax, focus, go to sleep with, and I'm happy to shed light on your cases that you've given me in requests. Now for today's chosen case. We have a case that comes from Texas. In 1946. It is called the Texarkana Moonlight Murders. At the time of the killings, it was also called the Phantom Killer, or the murderer was branded the Phantom Killer by the press, local press. So we have 1946 in Texarkana, Texas. Texarkana, for those of you who might not be in the United States or just aren't familiar with the area, is also a city in Arkansas, and the city is named for the region where it is located, which is in the eastern part of Texas on one of the points of the state and the southwest corner of Arkansas. So it sort of meets this area at the border. The state of Louisiana also contributes a bit to the name, but the 2 states we're talking about today are Texas and Arkansas, with that city specifically. And at the time of the murders, I'm going to go through some of the ramifications that this series of murders, they saw the town's behavior change because of these murders, and I want you to understand how many people were in this town to get the gravity of how this would have affected a town of such a size at the time. So this town had, in 1940, so this case took place in 1946, this town had at the 1940 census a population of about 17,000 people, and in the 1950 census, 4 years after this case, they had about 24,700 people. So quite a difference in their population. So we can say at the time possibly around 20,000 people were inhabiting this area, and that is smaller nowadays than the size of an average American college town. So that gives you an idea of just how small this area was at the time. This case took place over 10 weeks. The fallout of it, or the winding down of it, pretty much took the rest of the year 1946. It began in February and lasted through October. The murders themselves, however, took place over 10 weeks. 8 people in total were attacked and 5 were killed. This again happened in February through October, and the killings only took place on the weekends. The dates of the killings range from February 22nd to May 3rd of 1946. The first attack was of a couple called Jimmy Hollis and Mary Jean Larry, and they were 25 and 19 years old. They were parked in a lover's lane after they had seen a movie, and it was about 11:45 at night. A man wearing a white cloth mask with holes cut out of it, so it looked like a pillowcase, according to the female victim, came up to their car pointing a gun and threatening them. He told them to get out of the car and then claimed he didn't want to kill them but wanted them, they assumed that he wanted to rob them in the moment. Hollis, who was the male victim, was struck with the butt of the gun. The gun made such a noise that the female victim, Larry, she thought it was a gunshot sound, but it was in fact the butt of the gun hitting his head. And then she was chased by the assailant around the area of where their car was parked. The assailant caught up to her, assaulted her, and then let her go. She was able to run away from this assailant. She was able to run to one of the nearest homes in the area, which again, this is a fairly rural area at the time, and have them call for help. Now, Hollis was still unconscious. He ended up recovering and then flagging down a passing motorist, who then helped him get help and report this incident. Both victims did survive. Now, police were suspicious of their witness statement, which we know witness statements can be unreliable for various reasons, but they both seem to intentionally get the appearance of this assailant incorrect to each other. So police thought that they might have known the individual who attacked them, which for an area this small could have been true. We will get to suspects later, but I will tell you now that there was no indication from the leading suspect that the police ended up believing did these crimes, would have known them, that we can find out to this day. The second attack was perpetuated on March 23rd, which was a Saturday, and the 2 victims were not found till the next morning, Sunday, March 24th of 1946. They were Richard Griffin, age 29, and his girlfriend, Polly Ann Moore, age 17. A passing motorist discovered the bodies at the site of another popular lover's lane. Both of the victims had been shot. Griffin was actually shot twice, and blood outside the car indicated that they had actually been shot outside the car and then posed back inside the car. So the killer had placed them back inside the car and left them sitting in the car, like as if they had been driving or still in the car when they were killed. A citywide investigation was launched at this point because police then realized that they had a serial attacker on their hands and launched a full-scale investigation. A $500 reward was put up at this point, but it generated more than 100 false leads. On Saturday, April 13th, a high school student called Betty Jo Booker and a friend of hers, Paul Martin, would end up becoming victims. Now, Betty Jo was playing that night at a local VFW club. She was a saxophonist in a band that often played venues like this in the area and played well into the night and early morning. Paul was tasked to pick her up, and he was found later, early in the morning, 6:30 in the morning, dead. His body was laying on the side of the road and was shot 4 times. And before he was found, the last sighting of him and Betty Jo was around 1:30 a.m. when he was picking her up from that VFW club. So in those 5 hours, something occurred where they were both murdered. Betty Jo's body was found around 11:30 a.m., 2 miles away from where Paul's body was found, and he was shot twice, she was shot twice, and his car was found a few miles from each of their bodies. So the 2 victims seem to have either run away from the scene of the actual incident where the assailant approached them in some way, or perhaps they were put there by the assailant. It's unsure, the police were unsure who was killed first in this situation, but both put up a very large struggle before they were killed. So evidence was found that they fought their attacker quite heavily before murdered. And the reward then increased to $1,700 because of the continued heinousness of these crimes. The final attack that can be attributed to the killer was perpetuated on Friday, May 3rd of 1946. And it happened to a couple called Virgil and Katie Starks. They were a married couple. He was a farmer and she was his wife. And they were lit in their living room in their home. Virgil was sitting in a chair that he often would find himself in at night, and Katie got up to go to their bedroom and relax to go to sleep, and all she heard sometime later was breaking glass, and this breaking glass would end up being a bullet that was fired through a window in their living room and struck Virgil. He was shot twice, and then he was killed, unfortunately, very soon after he was shot. When Katie discovered that this had happened, she ran to call the police. They had a telephone, which was a wall crank phone, like the very old models of telephones that you sometimes see that are antiques. She tried to call the police twice unsuccessfully on this phone, and then heard the assailant trying to break in to their kitchen, and then she was also shot through a nearby window. So this assailant was prowling around the outside of their home, trying to break in and cause harm to both of them. She was shot through her face twice as well. One of the bullets exited her cheek on one side, so she was shot through one side of her face and it exited the other, and then the other bullet actually became lodged under her tongue after striking her in the jaw and broke her jaw upon being fired at her. She was able to run out of the home to a neighbor who unfortunately did not have a phone, but fired a rifle to alert another nearby neighbor who had a car that she was injured and would need to go to a hospital. They all accompanied her to a nearby hospital, and then police were eventually informed that Virgil was still in the home, dead. They came to investigate shortly after. While there, police found some of the most useful evidence that they would find in this entire case. So the previous murders had really not, except for the eyewitness testimonies, had not really led them to any one particular individual. There were no solid leads. They did not have any solid evidence that they could find at the scene. Well, they found bullet casings, a specific kind of flashlight, which I will go a little bit more into in a moment, boot prints, and partial fingerprints around the inside of the house. So when they arrived, they were able to find all of this forensic evidence in the home. Now in 1946, as you probably know, forensic science was still in its infancy, almost non-existent. They had fingerprinting. They had certain ways of finding out, tracing products, measuring boot prints, very basic science, but if the right kind of evidence was found, they may have been able to connect it to somebody who's already a criminal in the area. Now they sent the fingerprinted, the flashlight to see if it had fingerprints on it to one of the Texas state laboratories. So this was a laboratory that had the ability to run fingerprints at a higher scientific level than the local area could. And as they were waiting for that, a picture was run of this flashlight in the paper. So it was a distinct looking flashlight that they ran in the paper at this time. And after this attack occurred, 47 officers were actually put on this case, which was quite a lot for this small area. And that was including calling in the Texas Rangers, who, if again you do not know, they're a special investigative group of individuals, and at the time were the highest level of investigation in the state of Texas. So the fact that they were called in on this case meant that the severity of the case was very high. The reward that police were offering was also increased to $7,025 through various means. Local community members donated to the cause to try to incentivize anyone to come forward with a lead. Throughout the weeks the murders were actually actively taking place, businesses were frozen. So this is why the community members were so motivated to give money to a source to incentivize someone to come forward, because the entire town was frozen in terror over this prospective phantom killer, as the papers first called him, and then later the Texarkana Moonlight Murderer. They even had teens, so the police utilized some interesting investigative methods when they were trying to lure the murderer to possibly attack potential victims. They recruited local teenagers and put them in decoy cars. So they would have officers nearby, but they would recruit couples to sit in these cars and see if the killer would take the bait. They also recruited certain members of their own team, so certain other officers, to sit in cars with mannequins to see if that would lure the killer. Neither one of those methods was successful. The killer was never baited in any way in those situations. As I said, during these attacks as well, businesses shut down early at nighttime. The entire town was empty after nightfall. And especially after the Starks murder, so after this final attack, people actively locked their doors. This was not a community that did that prior to this occurring. 1946, rural Texas, people felt safe in their homes. They armed themselves in extra ways. They nailed metal sheets to their windows and made window guards. It became so prevalent to do this in the area that stores sold out of stocks, guns, ammunition, so everything that would go along with arming yourself, and certain kinds of window coverings like blinds and other materials that you could use to cover your windows. Reports of prowlers also went up at this time. Most of them were considered hysterical reports because people were understandably paranoid due to these attacks. And it got so bad at one point that you would have to call ahead or tell your neighbors in some way if you're going to come and show up to their homes. People were so on edge that they would react to someone showing up suddenly in their home, so you had to be careful and make sure that you were informing family or friends if you're going to be coming by. Now, the last murder took place in May, the last attacks took place in May, and concern about this situation lasted throughout the summer. So this paranoia that I'm describing went through the summer until October of 1946, when after several months of nothing happening, the Texas Rangers were actually called off the case and slowly left Texarkana. So they were taken off the case and just left the area. People calmed down. A peace was restored to the area because the attacks were finally over. You may ask yourself, however, why did the attacks stop? Well, this is where we get to suspects. Police, after interviewing hundreds of people and having several main suspects, centered on a man called Yule Sweeney. And interestingly enough, he was put in jail in July of 1946 for car theft and then sentenced for life, to go to prison for life in 1947 due to many crimes in his life, and he was not released until 1973. Why police suspected this individual is because on that charge of car theft, that original charge in 1946, he and his wife were both taken into custody because she was found driving the car that he had stolen. When she was arrested, she believed that they were coming to find her, as she said, because her husband killed someone. And he had been discussing these killings with her and her family for some weeks' time. And he gave her details from the first two attacks that police had never released to the press. Physical evidence, however, was a little bit more difficult to find for the police, as they didn't have many pieces of evidence that they had found at the scene in the first place. So those fingerprints we were talking about before, the potential ones in the flashlight actually ended up yielding no viable fingerprints, and the partial fingerprints in the home did not match Ewell Sweeney. However, if you know something about fingerprinting, you have to have a certain level of match or integrity of the print in order to match it, and these prints did not have enough viability to be matched. So it wasn't as if it was a definitive unmatch, more like an unknown one way or another. They could not definitively match him to those prints because they were not usable prints in the end. The most damning piece of evidence for him being at one of the crime scenes was actually a shirt that was found in his possession. So when his wife was arrested, part of her confession that she gave was that he collected objects from all of the murders, which, as true crime enthusiasts will know, or people who just like crime dramas will know, that this is a common behavior, or a behavior we see somewhat often with serial killers, with murderers that do multiple killings, where they will take an object, something that means something to the victim, and take it for themselves. They call it collecting trophies on occasion. So he had trophies, but only one of them could be definitively tied to a victim. The police found a khaki work shirt. When they looked in the shirt, it had the laundry stamp. So when you would send your clothes away for laundry and then it would come back, that was revealed under a blue light to have said Stark. So it was believed to have belonged to Virgil Starks. And in the pocket of this khaki work shirt, a piece of metal welding material was actually found inside the pocket, and he was also a welder. So one of the professions that he did commonly in the area, the work he did in the area, he was not only a farmer, but he also welded quite a lot. Unfortunately, this evidence wasn't enough to convict Virgil of the murders, but he was, like I said, put away for that car theft that I was discussing with you before, and then further convicted of multiple crimes that they were able to uncover, mostly theft-related crimes, when he was in jail, and he was sentenced to go to prison for life, but he was actually let out in 1973. He died in a nursing home in 1994. This murder case became sensational. Well, the town had always had rumors about it, and it was a local legend of sorts. But in 1976, there was a movie made called The Town That Dreaded Sundown, and that's how this murder was started to be talked about more widely. So this movie actually is based on the Texarkana Moonlight Murders. And every year in Texarkana, at Halloween time, they do show this movie at their Movies in the Park. It ends their summer movie season. It's been a tradition since 2003. A number of fiction and nonfiction books have also been written about this topic. And unfortunately, over the years, this case has become somewhat forgotten through in the way of police investigation, as all of the files and evidence and official notes on this case have actually been purged from their records. So there are no current, though this is technically an open case for the local department, there are no current files available, no current evidence, nothing is still available in this case for review. Now, I also said something earlier, if you'll remember, that this was related somehow to the killer, the Zodiac Killer case. Well, there is a theory out there that the Zodiac Killer, whose description bears slight resemblance to the description that the first two victims gave, may have done these crimes prior to himself committing his own crimes in California. Now, I personally don't think they are connected, but that doesn't mean they're not. And I would urge you to research that connection a little bit more if you're interested in that little tidbit, that fact. Thank you for joining me for another installment of True Crime and Tapping. Francis thanks you too. And we'll be back later this month with our first viewer request case, which I will hint at a little bit on my Twitter before I post it or film it. You can find that information in the description below. And like I have said before, if you have not yet requested a case but you would like to, please feel free to do so in the comments below, or send me an email or a message through any of my social media platforms. I'd be happy to cover a case that you'd like to see attention put on or just discussed in this format. Thank you so much for watching, and please be safe out there.